Hey, everybody, it's Mr. Fuller. I hope you guys are all doing well. I just wanted to spend a few minutes and go over this assignment. As you can see, it says Part 1 Causes of Vietnam War. Excuse me. We're going to break it up into two parts. So, as you're looking at the overview, the first part, we're going to talk about what caused the war in Vietnam. And then next week, we're going to take a look at the lives of the soldiers. You know how much I like to do that. So next week we'll have a bunch of good video clips and a bunch of real cool pictures and images of the war. So, but for today, what I want you to do is be able to explain the causes of the war in Vietnam and why the U.S. became involved. So, just some background for you. I want you to understand why we studied the Vietnam War because it was so long ago. Why is it important? And so down here, you'll notice I'm circling it with the cursor, a video clip. It's about 3 minutes long. It's a pair of really smart people talking about why we study the Vietnam War. So I don't want you to answer any questions. I just want you to listen to it. But part of the reason is right here in these bullets. Well, why do we study it? Because it's one of the longest wars in U.S. history. We were involved in 1955 originally, and you're going to see that that changes. But for 20 years, we were involved in a fight in Vietnam. About 3 to 4 million people, they're not sure exactly how many people were killed and wounded. A lot of those people that were killed were women and children, and a lot of old people died in this combat. About 56,000 American soldiers died. And more importantly, or not more importantly, soldiers' lives are the most important thing. But the United States lost this war. And it was hard for America to accept that fact. We know we're one of the greatest countries in the world. And the idea that we could lose to a small country was really hard for US to handle. And that sort of led to this new thing. People at home started protesting against the war, and it changed our government policies. So that's why we're studying this. Again, just watch the video clip and listen. The guy tells an interesting story, no questions. So, two, let's talk about this. Where is Vietnam? Well, it's in Southeast Asia. It's a peninsula, a little strip of land south to China. So take a look at the map. We have China up here in the north, and then it has two other small countries are bordering Vietnam. So tell me, study the map. What are those two countries? And then I have a short reading here about what happened. So really quick, I just want you to read this and answer two questions. I want you to know something that we're going to talk about Vietnam from like the 1950s on, but for thousands of years, this country existed in Southeast Asia. So we're going to pick it up kind of late in the game. But France, the country of the French, colonized. They took over Vietnam because they wanted to control the valuable resources of rice, coffee, and tea. So the French took over to make some money. They wanted to take advantage of the resources. They colonized the country. The Vietnamese did not like the French rule. They wanted to run their country their own way. So in the early 1950s, a group of Vietnamese formed an army to fight against the French rulers. This rebel group was led by a man named Ho Chi Minh. Because of Ho Chi Minh's leadership, the rebels were able to defeat the French army. So this is a small group of rebels, kind of like the United States fighting against England to get our own independence. Ho Chi Minh fought against the French rulers and was victorious. So because he defeated this big power, what they did is they made a temporary peace agreement. The French and Vietnamese agreed to divide the country into North and South Vietnam. North Vietnam created a communist-style government led by Ho Chi Minh, while South Vietnam became a capitalist democracy supported by France and the U.S. So this is just like what happened in Korea. You may remember that Korea, after World War II, was occupied, and then it was split in half, North and South, in order to get the peace and restore the country. And then they were supposed to reunite the country again. Same thing in Vietnam. It was split between North and South to allow the French time to pull out. But while they were split, they each formed a government that were very different from each other. And the North became communist, and the South was more like us, a democracy. So what's next? Part 3, the U.S. becomes involved in the Vietnam War. So read the information and answer the questions, right? This is long. Break it up. Take your time. But here's a map of Vietnam. You can see how it was divided, north and south. South is green, the north is red. So the North, the problem is when you divide the country, the North wanted to reunite, bring back together North and South Vietnam as one country, but they wanted it to be a communist country. And remember, America was strongly against communism. So the U.S. started giving money and military aid to the government of South Vietnam. The goal of this aid was to prevent the communists in the North from taking over South Vietnam. So similar to Korea, we started dumping a lot of money and military advisors in the South Vietnam so that they wouldn't be taken over by the communist North. Okay. So answer over here why we sent the money and the military aid. I bolded a lot of information to help you. Let me see next. The problem was that most of the Vietnamese, the whole country, just like Korea, they wanted to be reunited. But the problem is the government in South Vietnam was not popular with its people. It was very poorly run, and it didn't really care about the concerns of the common people. So in 1957, a rebel group formed in South Vietnam called the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong were communists that wanted to reunite North and South Vietnam. So who were they? They were a group of rebels in the South that was formed to try to weaken the government so the North could take over. They wanted one communist country. So the important part of this lesson I want you to know is the domino theory. We'll explain the domino theory. Look, I put a little snazzy GIF here. Take a look at this image too. The Viet Cong rebels began to fight against the South Vietnamese government. They hoped the government would fall and North Vietnam could take over. The U.S. began to send money and military aid to help the struggling South Vietnamese government. The U.S. helped South Vietnam because of the domino theory. The domino theory was the belief that if one nation falls to communism, then other nearby nations would also fall and become communist. So remember, the United States didn't like communism, and we'd do anything we could to stop it from spreading. So just like dominoes, dunk, 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 falling down, they felt the same about this region and the countries. That if the Viet Cong, see the guy with the hat, if Vietnam fell to communism, well, then the countries next door, remember our little map I had you look at, Laos, Cambodia, Taiwan, Burma, India, maybe all these countries would also become communist. So America got really concerned that, yeah, it's a tiny little country, but if we let communism spread, well, then maybe it's going to spread to the whole region. And that the U.S. couldn't stand. So what happens next? The United States involvement in South Vietnam continues to grow. We send more money and more military aid, but despite the support, the South Vietnam government continues to lose the fight against the rebel army. So we're dumping all this money and military aid into South Vietnam, and they're losing. We're backing the wrong team. So in 1965, American President Lyndon Johnson tried a new strategy. President Johnson sent American combat soldiers to fight the Viet Cong. So this is the big change. In 1965, here's the question. Americans said, okay, you guys aren't winning the war, you need our help. And he committed U.S. troops to go fight in South Vietnam. And this is really how America gets involved. So after 10 years of trying to support the government and give them military aid, now we're finally sending troops. President Johnson believed in the domino theory and that the U.S. must stop the spread of communism into South Vietnam. The U.S. was now officially at war with communist forces in Vietnam. Okay. So why did President Johnson change U.S. strategy? And it's kind of right here. President believed. And then describe his change. Well, what did he do? What's the big change? Well, we know the answer is that he sent U.S. combat troops to actually fight. Okay. So I know there's a lot here. Take your time. You got all week to do this. You guys can email me with any questions. Okay. I hope this is helpful, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all soon. Take care.